You wake up every single morning, pour your coffee, and look at the reality of your life in this country, and you see the price of eggs, you see the gas pump, and you see a border that looks more like a turnstile than a boundary of a sovereign nation. You are worried about your children's future, you are worried about the safety of your community, and you are worried about whether the dollar in your pocket will be worth a dime by this time next year. Then, you make the mistake of turning on the television to see what your elected officials in Washington, D.C. are doing to solve these problems. And what do you see? You don't see solutions, and you certainly don't see adults having a serious conversation about how to save this republic from the brink of disaster. Instead, you see a circus, a performative theater of outrage designed not to legislate, but to generate sound bites for social media while the country burns. We are watching an absolute masterclass in political gaslighting unfold on the floor of Congress, and it affects every single one of us because while they are playing these games, your government is paralyzed. The latest episode of this reality TV show features Representative Delia Ramirez, a darling of the far-left progressive wing, engaging in what can only be described as a badgering, disrespectful, and fundamentally dishonest interrogation of a cabinet secretary. They call it oversight, but let's call it what it actually is. It is obstructionism disguised as virtue, and it is a direct attack on the executive branch's ability to actually function. When you watch a clip like this, where a member of Congress is shouting demands for resignation and refusing to let a witness speak, you have to realize that this isn't about the law, and it isn't about the Constitution. It is about power, and it is about their terrifying fear of losing control over the administrative state. Let's look at the tactic being used here because it is a trademark move of the modern Democrat Party when they have run out of substantive arguments. You see Ramirez hammering the secretary with these rapid-fire yes or no questions, demanding binary answers to incredibly complex administrative issues. This is not an attempt to get to the truth. It is a trap designed to strip away context and nuance. In the real world, in the business world, and certainly in the governance of a superpower nation, nothing is ever just a simple yes or no, especially when we are talking about the allocation of funds or the restructuring of failing government offices. By demanding a yes or no answer, she is effectively gagging the witness, preventing them from explaining the legal justification or the strategic necessity of their actions. It is a bully tactic, plain and simple, used by people who know that if the full explanation were allowed to see the light of day, their entire narrative would crumble into dust. She accuses the secretary of violating the Constitution and ignoring the co-equal branches of government, which is rich coming from a party that has spent years ruling by executive fiat whenever it suited them. The hypocrisy is so thick you could cut it with a knife, but we need to look past the theatrics and ask what is actually happening here. Ramirez is angry about the unauthorized closing of government offices and the alleged misuse of public funds. Now, to the average American taxpayer who has been funding a bloated, inefficient, and unresponsive bureaucracy for decades, the idea of closing down government offices doesn't sound like a crime. It sounds like a good start. We have needed a cleaning of the house in Washington for generations, and the moment someone actually tries to streamline operations, cut the fat, or shut down departments that are wasting our money, the left screams constitutional crisis. This is why this matters to you, sitting at home. They are trying to criminalize the very idea of efficiency. When Ramirez stands there and berates a cabinet secretary for making executive decisions, she is effectively saying that the bureaucracy is sacred and that no changes can be made without the express permission of the most radical elements of Congress. They view the federal government not as a service provider to the American people, but as a jobs program for their political allies and a mechanism to enforce their ideology. When an administration comes in and tries to pivot, to change direction, or to stop the bleeding of taxpayer dollars, the establishment strikes back with this kind of ferocious, performative anger. They aren't protecting the Constitution, they are protecting the swamp. The demand for resignation is the cherry on top of this ridiculous sundae. It has become the default setting for the Democrats. If you disagree with us, you shouldn't just be debated, you must be removed, destroyed, and exiled. Ramirez isn't interested in fixing the alleged problems. If she were, she would be having a conversation about how to reallocate those funds properly or how to better manage those offices. But she doesn't want to fix it. She wants a scalp. She wants to go back to her base and say, "Look, I took down a bad man," because that is the only currency they have left. They cannot run on the economy, they cannot run on the border, and they cannot run on global stability, so they have to run on the destruction of their political enemies. It is crucial to understand the language she uses, framing the Secretary's actions as a violation of civil rights and a dismissal of the people's will. This is classic linguistic manipulation. By framing a budgetary or administrative dispute as a civil rights issue, she escalates the emotional stakes to a level where logic no longer applies. Suddenly, closing a redundant office isn't just a management decision. It's an attack on democracy itself. This is how they mobilize the mob. They take mundane procedural disputes and dress them up in the language of existential dread. It is dangerous, it is divisive, and quite frankly, it is insulting to the intelligence of the American voter who can see right through this charade. We need to talk about the concept of co-equal branches that she keeps harping on. Yes, the Constitution establishes checks and balances, but it also establishes a separation of powers. The executive branch has the authority to execute the laws and manage the day-to-day operations of the government. Congress has the power of the purse and the power to legislate, but they do not have the power to micromanage every single decision made by a cabinet secretary. What Ramirez is attempting to do here is to blur the lines of separation of powers, effectively trying to act as both the legislator and the executive. She wants to dictate how the department is run from her perch in the committee room, and when the secretary asserts his authority to manage his own department, she cries foul. It is a power grab by the legislative branch, specifically by the radical wing that feels entitled to control every lever of government regardless of who sits in the Oval Office. Think about the chilling effect this has on anyone who wants to serve their country in an executive capacity. If you know that trying to save money or reorganize a failing department will result in you being hauled in front of a committee, screamed at, called a criminal, and told to resign, why would any competent person take the job? And maybe that is the point. Maybe they want to make it so miserable for anyone who isn't a deep state loyalist to serve that only their cronies remain. This is a strategy of attrition. They are trying to wear down the opposition through constant, high-decibel harassment. It is not oversight. It is harassment disguised as parliamentary procedure. Let's dig deeper into the accusation of misuse of public funds. In the world of Washington, D.C., misuse often simply means spending money on things Democrats don't like. We have seen this time and time again. If money is spent on border security, it's a misuse. If it's spent on enforcing existing laws, it's a misuse. But if billions are sent overseas or funneled into green energy boondoggles that go nowhere, that is considered investment. We have to look at the specifics of what Ramirez is actually angry about. If the Secretary is moving funds to prioritize operational efficiency or to enforce the laws that are actually on the books, that is not misuse. That is doing the job they were sworn to do. The outrage from Ramirez suggests that the money is being taken away from pet projects or entrenched interests that she feels beholden to protect. The visual of this confrontation is just as important as the words. You have a representative who is visibly agitated, emotional, and aggressive, facing down a secretary who is attempting to maintain composure. The left loves to praise this kind of behavior as passion, but let's be honest, If a conservative male representative spoke to a female Democrat witness the way Ramirez spoke to this secretary, it would be the lead story on every mainstream news network for a week. He would be called a misogynist, a bully, and a threat to democracy. But because it is a progressive woman attacking an establishment figure or a conservative appointee, it is framed as speaking truth to power. The double standard is nauseating, and it is part of why the American people have completely lost faith in these institutions. This behavior from Ramirez is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a party that has completely lost its tether to reality. They believe that their moral superiority justifies any tactic, any breach of decorum, and any distortion of the truth. They truly believe that they are on a crusade, and when you are on a crusade, you don't need to be fair, and you certainly don't need to be polite. You just need to destroy the infidel. In this case, the infidel is anyone who believes in fiscal responsibility, limited government, and the rule of law. The secretary represents a threat to their hegemony, and therefore, he must be dehumanized and driven from office. But let's go back to the yes or no demand, because it is the key to understanding the intellectual dishonesty at play here. When you ask a question like, "Did you violate the Constitution, yes or no?" you are asking a loaded question that assumes guilt. It is like asking, "Have you stopped beating your wife yet?" There is no right answer that doesn't incriminate you in their twisted game. If the secretary says no, she will produce some obscure memo or interpretation of a statute to claim he is lying under oath. If he tries to explain, she cuts him off and claims he is being evasive. It is a show trial tactic straight out of a totalitarian regime. It is designed to produce a guilty verdict regardless of the evidence. It is a mockery of the justice system and a mockery of the oversight process. The impact of this on the American people is profound because it distracts from the real work that needs to be done. While Ramirez is grandstanding for the cameras, what is happening with the fentanyl crisis? What is happening with the supply chains? What is happening with our crumbling infrastructure? Nothing. Because the energy of the capital is being sucked into these black holes of partisan theatrics. Every minute spent on this charade is a minute not spent solving the problems that are actually hurting your family. They are burning daylight and burning your tax dollars to film campaign commercials on the floor of the House. And notice how she invokes the people she represents. She claims to be speaking for the marginalized, for the people who need these government offices. But do the people of her district really need a bloated, inefficient federal office that wastes money? Or do they need a thriving economy, safe streets, and a government that gets out of their way? I would argue that the greatest disservice you can do to the American people is to saddle them with a government that is too big to succeed and too expensive to sustain. By fighting to keep every single office open, every single dollar flowing into the bureaucracy, she is actively hurting the economic prospects of the very people she claims to champion. It is the tragedy of the modern welfare state mentality. They measure compassion by how much money they spend, not by how many problems they solve. Furthermore, the accusation that the secretary is ignoring the legislative branch is a projection. The legislative branch, under the control of progressives like Ramirez, has largely abdicated its duty to write clear laws, preferring instead to pass massive omnibus bills that no one reads and then leaving the details to the unelected bureaucrats. Now that there is someone in the executive branch who is actually reading the fine print and making decisions, they are panicking. They want the executive branch to be a rubber stamp for their wish list, not a co-equal branch with its own constitutional prerogatives. This clash is fundamental. It is a clash between the administrative state, the fourth branch of government that the founders never intended, and the constitutional executive who is accountable to the voters. When Ramirez demands his resignation, she is essentially saying that the voters' choice in the last election, or the administration's mandate, acts as a nullity if it contradicts her worldview. She is trying to veto the executive branch. This is a dangerous precedent. If we allow Congress to bully cabinet secretaries out of office every time there is a policy disagreement, we will have a revolving door government where nothing ever gets done and no long-term strategy can ever be implemented. Stability is a key component of national strength, and these constant attempts to decapitate the leadership of the executive departments destabilize our nation and make us look weak on the world stage. We have to understand that this is not just about one secretary or one representative. This is a microcosm of the war for the soul of America. On one side, you have the forces of entrenched bureaucracy, identity politics, and unlimited government expansion, represented by Delia Ramirez. On the other side, you have the forces of common sense, fiscal sanity, and constitutional order. The reason this hearing is so heated, the reason Ramirez is so angry, is because she knows that her side is losing the argument with the American people. People are waking up. They are realizing that the help the Democrats have been promising for 50 years has only led to dependency and decay. The anger you see from her is the anger of a declining establishment that is terrified of losing its grip. So, when you see this clip, don't just see a rude politician. See a desperate system fighting for its survival. See the deep state in panic mode. They are throwing everything they have at this secretary because he represents the one thing they fear most: accountability. They don't want to answer for where the money went. They don't want to explain why those offices were empty while the budget kept going up. They don't want the American people to see behind the curtain. That is why she won't let him speak. That is why she demands a yes or no. Because the full sentence, the full paragraph, the full truth, is an indictment of her entire political philosophy. This 60-minute journey we are embarking on today is going to peel back the layers of this confrontation. We aren't just going to react to the shouting. We are going to dissect the strategy, expose the lies, and show you exactly how this 3-minute exchange explains almost everything that is wrong with Washington, D.C. right now. We are going to look at the history of these tactics. We are going to follow the money that Ramirez is so desperate to protect, and we are going to ask the tough questions that the mainstream media refuses to ask. Buckle up, because we are going to dismantle the narrative of the left, brick by brick, starting right now. Let's get into the meat of this accusation regarding the Constitution, because this is where the gaslighting reaches stratospheric levels. Ramirez stands there, pointing her finger, accusing the secretary of violating the supreme law of the land, and we are supposed to just nod along? Give me a break. These are the same people who treat the Constitution like a cafeteria menu, picking and choosing the parts they like and ignoring the rest. They love the parts they can twist to expand government power, but when it comes to the Second Amendment, or the 10th Amendment which protects states' rights, or the actual duty of the executive branch to enforce immigration laws, suddenly the Constitution is just an old piece of paper written by dead men. The audacity to lecture anyone on constitutional fidelity while actively supporting policies that dissolve our borders and sense of free speech is the kind of irony that would be funny if it weren't so dangerous. When Ramirez talks about ignoring co-equal branches, she is engaging in a very specific type of deception. The Constitution does not say that Congress gets to run the executive branch. It says Congress passes laws. Once those laws are passed, it is up to the executive, the president and his cabinet, to execute them. That implies discretion. That implies management. If a law says establish a Department of Education, it doesn't mean that department must exist in perpetuity exactly as it was designed in 1979, growing fatter and more useless every year. If a secretary looks at a department and says, "This office is redundant, it's wasting money, and it's not serving the American people," and decides to consolidate it, that is not a constitutional crisis. That is management. That is leadership. That is exactly what we elect presidents to do. But to the professional politicians in DC, management looks like violation because they view every government desk as a permanent monument to their own power. We need to drill down on this issue of closing offices because it is the smoking gun of their entitlement. Why is Delia Ramirez so terrifyingly upset about a government office closing? Is it because the constituents are begging for its services? I highly doubt it. Most Americans dread going to government offices. We dread the lines, the red tape, the surly attitude of the bureaucrats who know they can't be fired. No, she's upset because government offices are the power centers of the left. They are the hiring halls for the administrative state. Every office that stays open is a budget line item that can be expanded next year. It's a place to put political allies on the payroll. It's a mechanism to funnel tax dollars into the communities that vote for them. When you close an office, you aren't just saving money. You are dismantling a piece of their political machine. That is why they react with such visceral, animalistic aggression. You are threatening their food supply. Consider the logic she is using. She claims that closing these offices violates civil rights. This is the weaponization of language I warned you about. By this logic, having a government office within walking distance is a civil right. Where does that end? Is it a civil right to have a DMV on every corner? Is it a civil right to have a federally funded community organizer in every neighborhood? They have diluted the meaning of civil rights, which used to mean the right to vote, the right to due process, the right to be treated equally under the law, and they have turned it into the right to free stuff provided by the government. This is a socialist redefinition of citizenship. They want you to believe that you cannot exist, that you cannot be free, unless the government is holding your hand and subsidizing your existence. It is a philosophy of dependency, and this secretary, by trying to shrink that footprint, is challenging their religion of dependency. And let's look at the financial aspect, which they always try to gloss over with emotional outbursts. We are $34 trillion in debt. Trillion. With a T. Our interest payments on the debt are now higher than our defense budget. We are driving a Ferrari off a cliff while arguing about the radio station, and here comes a secretary who finally says, maybe we should stop spending money on this office that doesn't do anything. And what happens? He gets crucified. Ramirez doesn't care about the debt. In her worldview, money is infinite. It just appears from the printing press at the Federal Reserve. To suggest that we have limits, that we have to make hard choices, that we can't fund everything forever, is seen as an act of violence by the left. They are economically illiterate, and they demand that we all participate in their fantasy where budgets don't balance and consequences don't exist. This hearing also exposes the rot within the committee system itself. These hearings used to be serious inquiries. They were boring, yes, but they were substantive. Members of Congress would ask questions to understand how a law was being implemented. Now, it's a content creation factory. Ramirez isn't talking to the secretary. She is talking to the camera. She is talking to her social media team who is ready to clip that video, slap some captions on it, and blast it out to TikTok with a caption like Queen Delia destroys mega secretary. It is performance art. The secretary is just a prop. He's a punching bag. If he actually answered her questions, it would ruin the clip. That's why she interrupts him. That's why she demands yes or no. An answered question is a failed viral moment. We are governed by influencers, not legislators. Think about the precedent this sets for the future. If a Republican administration cannot reorganize the executive branch without being accused of breaking the law, then elections don't matter. If the bureaucracy is permanent and unchangeable regardless of who wins the White House, then we don't have a democracy. We have an administrative oligarchy. This is the deep state in plain sight. It's not a conspiracy theory about guys in dark rooms smoking cigars. It's right there on C-SPAN. It's Delia Ramirez screaming that you are not allowed to touch the machine. You are not allowed to turn it off. You are not allowed to fix it. You just have to feed it money and shut up. The secretary's demeanor during this abuse deserves some credit. It is incredibly difficult to sit there and be berated by someone who clearly has no idea what they are talking about, someone who is twisting the law to suit a narrative. He represents the adults in the room. He represents the people who actually have to run things, not just talk about them. And that contrast is what frightens them. The left thrives on chaos. They thrive on emotion. When they are met with calm, rational, legal competence, they short-circuit. That's why she gets louder. That's why she gets more aggressive. Because his calmness proves he is right. If he were guilty, he'd be panicking. But he's not. He's sitting there, likely thinking about the statute that explicitly gives him the authority to do exactly what he did, watching a child throw a tantrum in a suit. Let's speculate for a moment on what was in those closed offices. If we dig into the details, which the mainstream media won't do, we'd probably find that these offices were processing centers for regulations that strangle small businesses. Or maybe they were outreach centers that served as de facto campaign headquarters for the Democrat Party. Or maybe they were just empty rooms where bureaucrats sat around collecting six-figure pensions. The fact that Ramirez won't specify exactly what vital service was lost tells you everything you need to know. If grandmothers were dying because an office closed, she'd be holding up a picture of a grandmother. But she's not. She's talking about abstract rights and processes. That means the loss wasn't to the public. The loss was to the bureaucracy itself. We also have to address the gender and race card that is implicitly being played here. Ramirez is a Latina woman. The secretary is likely a white male or an establishment figure. The dynamic is curated to look like punching down if he responds, but punching up if she attacks. It is a shield of identity politics. She can be as rude, as interruptive, and as disrespectful as she wants, and if he raises his voice 1 decibel, he will be destroyed by the media as an aggressor. It is a rigged game. They use their identity as a sword and a shield, preventing any honest debate. It's cowardice. If your ideas are good, they should stand on their own without you having to hide behind your demographic profile. But their ideas aren't good. Their ideas have failed every time they've been tried, so they resort to these identity power plays. Let's go back to the phrase constitutional responsibility. Do you know what the actual constitutional responsibility of the House of Representatives is? It is to pass a budget. Something they haven't done on time in years. It is to secure the nation. Failed. It is to protect the value of the currency. Failed. Ramirez is lecturing a cabinet secretary on his job, while she and her colleagues are failing miserably at theirs. It is the classic projection of the incompetent. They can't fix the border, they can't fix inflation, they can't stop crime in their own cities. Look at Chicago. Look at San Francisco. So they haul in a guy who is trying to save a few bucks and scream at him to make themselves feel powerful. It is pathetic. And don't overlook the immediate resignation demand. This is the cancel culture mindset applied to government. There is no room for error, no room for difference of opinion. You must be purged. This is the Bolshevik mentality. It is the idea that the state must be pure, and purity is defined by total allegiance to the party line. If you step out of line, if you close the wrong office, if you cut the wrong budget, you are not just wrong, you are an enemy of the people. This rhetoric incites hatred. It divides the country. It makes it impossible for us to ever find common ground. How can you compromise with someone who thinks your administrative decision is a violation of human rights? You can't. And that's what they want. They don't want compromise. They want total submission. The American people are watching this, and while the Twitter crowd might cheer for Ramirez, the guy sitting in Ohio, the mom in Florida, the worker in Texas, they look at this and they see a government that hates them. They see a representative who fights harder for a bureaucrat's desk than she fights for their jobs. They see a system that is obsessed with its own preservation while the country crumbles. This video isn't a win for the Democrats. It's a recruitment poster for the conservative movement. It shows exactly what we are up against. We aren't up against bad policy. We are up against a fanaticism that has infested the halls of power. So when she slams her hand on the table or points that finger, remember, she is pointing at you. She is telling you that you don't get to decide how your tax money is spent. She is telling you that the experts know better. She is telling you that the Constitution means whatever she says it means in that moment. It is arrogance. Pure, unadulterated arrogance. And the only way to stop it is to expose it, to mock it, and to defeat it. We need to ask ourselves, what would happen if the secretary actually resigned? Would Ramirez be happy? No. She would just move on to the next target. The goal isn't the resignation. The goal is the terror. The goal is to send a message to every other person in the executive branch. Do not cross us. Do not cut our budgets. Do not touch our power. It is a mafia tactic. Nice department you have there. Shame if something happened to it. We cannot let these tactics work. We have to stand behind the people who are willing to take the arrows. We have to support the disruptors. Because if we don't, we are going to be left with a government that is fully owned and operated by the Delia Ramirez's of the world, and that is a terrifying prospect for the future of liberty. As we move into the next part of this analysis, we are going to trace the money. We are going to look at the specific funding streams that were threatened by these office closures. Because in Washington, if you want the truth, you don't listen to what they say. You watch where the dollar bills go. And I guarantee you, behind all this talk of constitutional duty and civil rights, there is a pile of cash that someone was afraid of losing. We are going to find it. Now, let's follow the money, just like I promised. In Washington, D.C., you never listen to the words. You watch the wallet. Why is Delia Ramirez, a progressive firebrand, fighting to the death for a bureaucratic office? Is it because she loves filing paperwork? No. It's because the federal bureaucracy is the ATM of the Democratic Party. When we talk about government offices, we aren't just talking about desks and chairs. We are talking about the distribution hubs for federal grants. We are talking about the pipeline that sends billions of your tax dollars into the hands of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, community activists, and consulting firms that are all staffed by, run by, and aligned with the far left. When this secretary moved to close those offices, he didn't just turn off the lights, he turned off the spigot. He cut the flow of cash to the activist class. You see, the dirty little secret of the swamp is that these agencies often outsource their work to partners. These partners are the foot soldiers of the woke agenda. They use federal grant money, your money, to push radical social engineering projects, to register voters in specific demographics, and to lobby for even more government spending. It is a perfect, self-sustaining money laundering operation. You pay taxes, the government gives it to an NGO, the NGO hires activists, and those activists campaign for Democrats who raise your taxes. It's the circle of life for the parasite class. So when Ramirez screams about civil rights, She is actually screaming about revenue streams. She is protecting the patronage network that got her elected. If those offices close, her friends lose their contracts. Her donors lose their influence. The community organizers lose their walking around money. That is the source of her panic. It isn't constitutional, it's transactional. She is a guard dog barking because someone is trying to take away the meat. And notice she never mentions the cost. She never says, keeping this office open costs X amount, but it yields Y result. She avoids the math because the math is damning. The math shows waste. She sticks to emotion because emotion covers a multitude of accounting sins. Let's talk about the public sector unions, the silent elephant in the room. Who works in these offices? Federal employees. Who are the biggest donors to the Democratic Party? Public sector unions. Every time a Republican tries to shrink the government, they are declaring war on the dues-paying members of the union machine. Ramirez is essentially a shop steward on the floor of Congress. She isn't representing the citizens of her district who work in the private sector and struggle to pay bills. She is representing the protected class of bureaucrats who enjoy job security that you can only dream of. This hearing is a message to the unions. I am fighting for your jobs. Keep the donations coming. It is a quid pro quo played out on C-SPAN. This is why the yes or no trap is so insidious. It prevents the secretary from exposing this network. If he were allowed to speak freely, he might say, "Congresswoman, we closed this office because it spent $50 million last year on consulting fees with zero measurable outcome." That is the soundbite they fear more than death. That is the truth that would end careers. So she cuts him off. She demands a binary answer to a fiscal reality. She is essentially putting her hand over his mouth to stop him from reading the receipts. It is censorship in real time. And let's look at the broader implication of her argument that the executive branch must blindly obey Congress on every operational detail. If that were true, we wouldn't need a president. We would just have a prime minister chosen by the House. The founders wanted a strong executive for a reason: to act. Congress is designed to deliberate, which means to argue and do nothing for months, but the executive is designed to execute. When a crisis hits, a border surge, a pandemic, a war, you need a leader who can move resources, open or close facilities, and pivot strategy immediately. Ramirez wants to tie the president's hands with red tape so that nothing can happen without a committee hearing. She wants to paralyze the government so that only the permanent bureaucracy has any power. This is the shadow government strategy. If they can't win the White House, they try to strip the White House of its power. They try to make the president a figurehead while the real decisions are made by the GS-15s deep in the bowels of the agencies who have been there for 30 years. This secretary is a threat because he is actually trying to govern. He is trying to take the steering wheel back from the autopilot. And the autopilot, the deep state, is fighting back through its proxies in Congress. Ramirez is just the avatar for a system that hates change and hates accountability. We also have to acknowledge the media's complicity in this. CNN and MSNBC will play that clip of her shouting and frame it as fierce. They won't ask about the budget. They won't ask about the statutory authority. They will frame it as a morality play, evil white man versus passionate minority woman. They prey on your racial guilt to stop you from looking at your bank account. It is a psychological operation. They want you to feel like you are a bad person if you agree with the secretary. They want you to feel that efficiency is a racist dog whistle. It is absurd, but it is effective on the weak-minded. We have to be strong enough to reject that framing and look at the hard facts. The hard fact is this: the American government is too big. It is a leviathan that is devouring our liberty and our prosperity. Every office that stays open when it should be closed is a theft from your children. Every dollar wasted on a redundant program is a dollar that isn't in your pocket for groceries or tuition. Ramirez is advocating for the theft. She is the accomplice. When she attacks the police who try to stop the theft, in this case, the secretary, she is showing us exactly whose side she is on. She is on the side of the system, not the citizen. Think about the arrogance of telling a cabinet official he needs to resign because he disagreed with you on staffing levels. It reveals a totalitarian impulse. In their world, you don't just lose an argument, you lose your livelihood. It's the same mindset that gets people fired from their private sector jobs for posting a conservative opinion on Facebook. It is the cancel culture coming to the cabinet room. They want a government of yes men. They want a cabinet that kneels. And this secretary refused to kneel. That is his only crime. He stood tall. If we let them win this narrative, if we let them define constitutional crisis as the president doing his job, then we are finished. We will have ceded control of our country to a permanent ruling class that is unaccountable to the voters. You voted for change? Too bad. Delia Ramirez says you can't have it. You voted to drain the swamp? Sorry, the swamp has civil rights. This is the battle line. It isn't about one hearing. It's about whether your vote actually counts. I want you to picture the average day in one of these government offices Ramirez is defending. Think of the Zootopia sloth scene. Think of the paperwork, the apathy, the slow-motion disaster that is federal service. Now imagine someone fighting to keep that. Fighting for the sloth. That is what you are watching. It is the defense of mediocrity. America didn't become a superpower by being a nation of bureaucrats. We became a superpower through innovation, risk-taking, and efficiency. The values Ramirez champions are the values of decline. They are the values of a nation that has given up on greatness and settled for compliance. And let's not forget the timing. These hearings always ramp up when the Democrats are in trouble. When the polls look bad, they manufacture a villain. They need a distraction. Look over here. A rogue secretary. A constitutional crisis. Don't look at the border. Don't look at the crime stats. Look at this stage drama. It is a magician's trick. Misdirection. While she is waving her left hand in the air screaming, her right hand is picking your pocket. As we move to the final part of this broadcast, I want to talk about what WE can do. It's easy to get angry, but anger without action is useless. We need a strategy to defeat this. We need to know how to support the officials who are brave enough to cut the fat. We need to know how to primary the politicians who protect the swamp. We are going to talk about the counter-revolution against the administrative state. Because if we don't fight back now, there won't be anything left to save. The 60 minutes are almost up, but the real work is just beginning. So, where do we go from here? We've spent the last hour dissecting the theater, the lies, and the dangerous power grab disguised as oversight by Representative Delia Ramirez and her cohorts. We've seen how they use emotional manipulation to protect a bloated bureaucracy. We've seen how they weaponize the concept of civil rights to secure their own funding streams. And we've seen how they try to bully competent leaders into submission with threats of resignation and cancellation. But knowing the enemy's tactics is only half the battle. Now, we have to talk about how to defeat them. The first step is to stop accepting their framing. When you see a clip like this on your feed, don't let your blood pressure spike. Don't just get mad. Get smart. Recognize it for what it is, a desperate defense of a failing system. When they say constitutional crisis, you translate that to budgetary tantrum. When they say violation of civil rights, You translate that to loss of patronage jobs. We have to become linguists of the left. We have to decode their newspeak and expose it to our friends, our families, and our neighbors. You are the media now. You have the power to share the truth and debunk the narrative. We need to support the disruptors. When a public official like this secretary actually tries to cut costs and streamline government, they are walking into a minefield. They are putting their careers and their reputations on the line for us. They need to know we have their backs. Write to them. Call your representatives and demand that they support fiscal sanity. Make it clear that we want offices closed if they aren't working. We want budgets cut if they are being wasted. We need to create a political environment where fiscal responsibility is rewarded, not punished. Right now, the only people screaming are the ones losing their free lunch. We need to start screaming louder about the fact that we are the ones paying for it. We also need to demand real oversight, not this performative garbage we saw from Ramirez. We need hearings that ask, where did the money go? What was the return on investment for this program? Why are we funding this NGO? We need to elect representatives who are not afraid to be boring, who are not afraid to be called names, and who are willing to do the hard, unglamorous work of auditing the federal government. We need accountants, not actors. We need serious people for serious times. The age of the celebrity politician needs to end if we want this republic to survive. And let's talk about the elections. Every 2 years, we have a chance to fire the board of directors. Delia Ramirez and those like her are in Congress because people voted for them. But many of those voters are low-information voters who only see the sound bites. It is our job to educate them. It is our job to show them that the policies Ramirez supports are the very policies that are making their groceries expensive, their streets unsafe, and their children's future uncertain. We have to connect the dots for people. We have to show them that the compassion of the left is actually cruelty because it traps people in poverty and dependency. We must also focus on the local level. The federal government is a monster, but it is fed by local roots. The same ideology that Ramirez spews in Washington is being taught in your local school board, your city council, and your county commission. The fight against the administrative state starts in your backyard. If you can stop the rot at the local level, you starve the beast in DC run for office. Support sane candidates. Show up at meetings. Be the person who asks the tough yes or no questions to them. Did you increase our property taxes, yes or no? Did you approve that wasteful project, yes or no? Turn the tables. Use their tactics against them, but use them in service of the truth, not a narrative. This confrontation we analyze today is a warning. It is a warning that the establishment will not go down without a fight. They will scratch, claw, scream, and lie to keep their grip on power. They will try to criminalize opposition. They will try to make governance impossible for anyone who isn't part of their club. But it is also a sign of their weakness. You don't scream like that if you are winning. You don't panic like that if you are secure. They are terrified because they know the American people are waking up. The giant is stirring. We are standing at a crossroads. Down one path lies the Delia Ramirez vision of America, a country where the government controls everything, where bureaucrats are kings, where dissent is crushed, and where you work solely to fund the state. Down the other path is the vision of the founders, a nation of free citizens, limited government, personal responsibility, and prosperity. The choice is yours. It is made every day in how you spend your money, how you vote, and what you refuse to tolerate. Don't let them demoralize you. That is their ultimate weapon. They want you to think it's hopeless, that the swamp is too deep, that they are too powerful. But look at that secretary. He sat there, he took the abuse, and he didn't break. He held the line. If he can do it in the belly of the beast, you can do it in your community. We are the majority. We are the producers. We are the patriots. And we are finished with the circus. Thank you for spending this hour with me. We've pulled back the curtain, we've exposed the machinery, and now we are armed with the truth. Go out there and use it. Stay vigilant, stay free, and never, ever back down.